Hello, good morning. Welcome to the symptoms.wiki YouTube channel. I'm joined by Linda Elsegood. Linda is founder of the LDN Research Trust, which was set up in the United Kingdom as a registered charity in 2004, and is the editor of the LDN books. Linda was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis in August of the year 2000, and she started LDN therapy in December of 2003, and now has a much better quality of life and hope for the future. So through the LDN Trust, Linda has connected with thousands of patients and connected these patients with doctors and pharmacists worldwide, and provided lots of information and patient stories about LDN. I'm, of course, Sean Moses, curator of symptoms.wiki. Linda, what an absolute pleasure and honor to have you with us today. Thank you for joining.
Well, it's my pleasure. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you. Your health journey has been simultaneously, for me, one of the most fascinating and uplifting stories I've ever heard. I'll just be so grateful if you could just kind of share it, with our audience. How did you manage to find out about LDN? What motivated you in that direction?
Would you like me to just, first of all, explain the position I was in health-wise before finding LDN?
Absolutely, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay, so before getting sick, I thought I was Wonder Woman. I could do everything, anything, fit everything into the day. If you want something done, you ask a busy person because they will do it. My husband was working away. I had 2 children. I was the taxi. I cooked, I cleaned, I worked full time. I did the decorating, the gardening. I was on the top of my game.
Okay.
And Christmas 1999, my mother had a heart attack, and the trauma and stress of that led to what we now know was an MS relapse. Now, I had peculiar things happen to me since the age of 13, when I had very bad glandular fever. I had nearly a year off school, which then led to what we would call now chronic fatigue syndrome. But they were episodes. Once I got over the glandular fever, it took about 18 months, and I was back to where I should be. But from then on, I used to have episodes of funny things, parts of me going numb or weak, but because they were never an issue, they never stayed long enough for me to think this is a problem. They were just incidents that came and went. But when my mother had this heart attack, the trauma of that, I was very close to my mother, really knocked me off balance. I started having more numbness, weakness, and I was just sick, getting really, really sick, and fatigue was a really big problem. So this was the Christmas. By Easter, I was fed up of not feeling well, and I said to my husband, if I go away for a week with the youngest daughter, I wanted him to come, but he was working, but just go away and then come back and I'll be fine. I will leave, I'll have broken this cycle of being ill. Of course, that's not what happened. We went to Portugal. It was meant to be hot and sunny at Easter, and it was cold, wet and windy. And the rain was hitting my left-hand side of my face. And believe it or not, the rain made my face go numb. So I thought,
okay.
It was numb, and I was very, very cold. I was tired. And I said to my husband, I think I'm going to have to go to the doctors when I get home. So I saw my doctor, who said I needed to see a neurologist, who I couldn't get to see until August. So it was a long wait. So in between that time, I wasn't having any relapses. I was just deteriorating all the time. So what I could do one day, then I couldn't. I lost my hearing in my left ear. I had double vision. The left-hand side of my body, you could draw a line down it, and the left-hand side was numb with pins and needles. not numb where you didn't feel anything. It was a numb that really, really hurt. And
Oh,
just to
wow.
put a sheet over me or anything was painful. It sounds ridiculous. I lost my bowel and bladder control. I had very bad vertigo. My left leg was like you could turn it on and off with an electric switch. I could be standing and then all of a sudden I would drop because my leg strength would go. So this continued, and I saw the neurologist in August, at which time I was in a wheelchair. I couldn't see because of the double vision. I hadn't got clarity of mind. Cognitively, it was terrible. And I'd lost the hearing in my left ear. Now, he wanted to do some tests to discover what was wrong with me. He needed to diagnose me. So I had 28 different blood tests for tropical diseases and everything you can think of. Evoked potential tests on my eyes and my ears. I had a MRI scan and I had lumbar puncture. And while I was waiting for the doctor to come and tell me the verdict of all these tests, a nurse came along and she said to me, "Oh," she said, "and how long have you had MS?" So I
Oh,
said,
wow.
"MS? I haven't got MS. Oh, I must have the wrong patient." And then the doctor, the consultant
Okay.
came in and told me I'd got MS, and I thought,
I see.
I thought probably I had.
Okay.
So he gave me a 3-day course of intravenous steroids,
Okay.
and he then gave me a second MRI, and he said that he was very concerned that I was going to end up deaf and blind. So you can imagine that puts you in one awful spin.
Of course.
And he said he would have to give me, even though they only like to give these intravenous steroids every 2 years, I was going to have another one. So I had another course. Well, it didn't work, and I blew up, and I was red like a tomato. I mean, I was just terrible, and sent home. So I was at that point having a relapse every 3 months. And if you think of the level I was at here, every relapse I dropped,
Okay.
I would drop 3 rungs of a ladder. I would then slowly get back up to 2 rungs. I would go back up to drop another 3. So all the time my level was dropping. I was deteriorating that quickly. So by October 2003, I saw my neurologist, who said to me, he did lots of different tests. And by this time, I had cognitive problems. I was choking on my food. My memory was terrible. I couldn't remember anything. I'd put a sentence together in my head, but what I thought I was saying wasn't actually what I was saying. It didn't come out making any sense. The numbness, the pins and needles, twitching muscles, restless legs, burning limbs. The hearing was still gone. The double vision was still there. The vertigo. I mean, I couldn't do anything for myself. I didn't know where my mouth was. So to put a cup to my lips, somebody would have to help me because I was, moving it all over the place. It was awful. And he examined me and said to me, "I'm terribly sorry, but you're secondary progressive MS now, and there's nothing more we can do for you." And as he was saying that, he opened the door to show me out.
That's
And I
incredible.
felt as though he may as well have said, "Go home, die quietly," or an embarrassment, because we can't do anything. So from there, I did contemplate ending it all, and I am a very positive person, but the state of mind that I was in at that point, my parents, my mother survived. My parents would keep saying, "If only we could take it from you. We've had a good life. We'd rather have it." My children, my husband, we didn't do things as a family because I was the mum in the bed who couldn't move. I was stopping everybody's life. I was halting it. They weren't able to enjoy their lives because of me. So I thought, oh, long story, but anyway, I'd got this new pill bottle of heavy duty pain medication, which I used to take. It it was a trade-off. The pains used to be so bad. I had bad pains in my head, really, really bad pains. I could take the tablets and then felt nauseous, so nauseous I couldn't move because I thought I was going to vomit. So it was a case of, do I want the really bad pain that I couldn't stand, or did I want the really bad nausea I couldn't stand? So I only ever took the painkillers when I couldn't stand it anymore, because the trade-off wasn't really worth it.
Okay.
So I'd got these painkillers and I was on my own, and I thought, it's the only way of releasing everybody from this situation. But then it was a case of who was going to find me, and it was going to be my 15-year-old daughter. Now, I couldn't do that to her, you know. So the only thing I could do was to prove everybody wrong, that there was something that could be done. I just had to find it. So this was in 2003.
Okay.
And I could only function sitting on a chair for 10 minutes. That was it. And I'd have to sleep for 3 or 4 hours after doing that. The internet wasn't as it is today. It was there were chat rooms in those days. There wasn't Facebook, or even web browsers search engines didn't actually come up with much. But I managed to find a group of people from America. I knew I wasn't unique. I knew there must be other people out there similar to myself. And I was told about LDN. And they said to me, if it doesn't do you any good, it won't do you any harm. Hey, did I care if it had possible horrible side effects? Because there was nothing else I could try. But
of course,
it was harmless. And I managed to find a Dr. Bob Lawrence in Wales, who's sadly passed now. He gave me the information, and he said to take it to your own doctor and see if they'll prescribe it. Unfortunately, they wouldn't, but my new doctor said to me that if I could get somebody to prescribe it for me, she would monitor me. So I felt as though I wasn't flying solo, that I had somebody on my team, as it were.
Good.
So I went back to Dr. Bob Lawrence, and he very kindly prescribed it for me, and my doctor monitored me. Now, I was told that you could have introductory side effects, you could have worsening of pre-existing symptoms, headaches, stomach issues, vivid dreams, disturbed sleep. I wanted all of those symptoms because I wanted to know it was working.
It was working, of course.
And it did nothing. I was so disappointed. It did absolutely nothing. When I say absolutely nothing, I think I actually slept better from the start, because my sleep was very, very poor.
Okay.
And I was very disappointed because I thought it's not going to work for me, and I didn't find anything else that I could try. So where do we go from here? But I stuck with it. And after 3 weeks, cognitively, it was amazing. It's like looking at a muddy puddle and somebody dropping a little bit of bleach in it, and it clears the water. That's how it was in my head. It was amazing.
Incredible.
And as it went on, the hearing and the eyesight and the cognitive problems, living in my head was similar to living in a television set that wasn't tuned in. And it was as if somebody had turned all the knobs and connected it. And it was like, whoa, you know, I can think, I can process things, you know, I can understand what other people are saying. And the plus point was they could understand what I was saying. And that was such a big deal, just to feel as though you'd got a little bit of you back, you know, after having lost who you were completely. Because at that point, I wasn't able to achieve anything. I had no control over my bowel or bladder. I had no control over what I did. All I did was survive from morning till night with other people helping me. I didn't actually do anything for myself. So that was amazing, but it took 18 months. It didn't all happen at night. Getting out of a wheelchair, I know after having been in bed for so long, I was in bed for 18 months and in a wheelchair, where I wasn't actually using my legs that much. When I started walking, I had terrible pains at the backs of my legs, up from my ankle up until my calf muscle. And I actually went to see a podiatrist at the hospital. Now, when you haven't got very good balance and they tell you to stand against the wall and hold the wall,
Okay.
he didn't quite understand the fact I wasn't really able to do that. But he ran his thumbs up the backs of my legs, and he said, "Does it hurt here?" And he pressed. Oh my goodness, did that hurt? And the problem I'd got with trying to walk, my tendons had shrunk, and that's what he was discovering, but it hurt on the insteps of my feet. So it was so painful to try and walk. So you had to do stretching exercise of those tendons to get them loose again to be able to walk. So I find it amazing when people say that they've been in a wheelchair for years and just get up and walk. How did they manage that? I couldn't do it, but it took time. And when I first started to walk, I could walk like 6 steps, and then it had to be 7 steps, 8 steps, and just, you know, building things up. And my hearing came back probably 90%. Double vision, I have to have prisms in my glasses. But the very nice young lady who did my Evoke potential tests, she could see that I was getting upset that the tests were so poor. This was when the consultant thought that I was going deaf and blind. She said to me that because my left ear on the test showed absolutely nothing, and she did it 3 times because she said that they would call it system failure. And the second time was the same, so she did it a 3rd time. But she said to me, in the brain there are so many redundant nerves that quite often another nerve will reroute itself from the ear, which it must have done. So fantastic. I was very pleased. She gave me some hope, even if it hadn't have worked. She made me feel there was a possibility that something could work, because she wasn't really meant to do that, but I really appreciated it. My eyesight was terrible, and I still, if I don't wear my glasses, it's still not good. But cognitively, we're good. Bowel and bladder is good.
Fantastic.
It has been. So, what did I want to do with all this information that I had done? Did I want to say, okay, I'm fine now and carry on with my life as before, or did I want to help other people? And it was a no-brainer. I can see financially it was a really good move for me, because I've never been paid since I started the charity. So it was a case of, okay, I want to tell everybody about LDN who were in that deep, dark place that I was in. I want them to know that there is some hope. There is something you can try. It's not a miracle drug. It's not a cure. It doesn't work for everyone, but it is really, really well worth trying. So that's what happened with the charity being set up. And we managed to, I managed to get lots of doctors on board, not only doctors, but consultants, dermatologists, gastroenterologists, pain specialists, rheumatologists, the list goes on. People at the top of their field, and who can't be mocked for not knowing what they're talking about. So on the website, we are all about science-based facts. There have been hundreds of small trials and studies on LDN. They're on the website. Information packs, absolutely everything, past conference materials. And we want people to know that the information that we're putting out there is factual and correct, because the internet is absolutely full of misinformation as well as good information.
It is. You're completely right. I mean, what a powerful story. I mean, there's so much to unpack. So, but I guess what I took out of it as a former uveitis patient, so I've struggled with autoimmune diseases myself in the past, was that when I heard about LDN, one of the first things I did was that I then Googled and I searched, LDN with uveitis. And for those who are just kind of wondering what is LDN, it's low dose naltrexone. So I Googled LDN uveitis, and uveitis being an ocular condition that I used to suffer from the recurrent version of it. I then began to see patients had been using LDN. They'd managed to somehow get prescriptions. And for some of these patients, I mean, the ones that I came across online, it was putting their uveitis into remission. That was fantastic. And I'd never heard about it. My doctor had never brought it up, so, but I guess that the first question that I would love to ask is just, how did you become your own advocate? Because what I'm hearing is that the medical system had almost just kind of given up on you, and you had to really say, okay, what do I need to get better? So could you just kind of walk us through the process when you began to search for LDN? At what point did you take on the advocacy of your own health, and what obstacles did you come across? How did you overcome some of those obstacles?
Okay. I think until you're sick, you believe that the health system is there and that whatever is wrong with you, you go and tell your doctor, he sends you to hospital, you see a consultant, and they have the magic to put you right. And sadly, more often than not, with many conditions, that is not the case, especially autoimmune conditions. There isn't an answer, basically. Yeah. So you have to take ownership and responsibility of your own condition. I did miss out. I was put on Rebif, which is an interferon drug, quite a while after being diagnosed. It must have been about a year, something like that. And I took it for 8 months. And before you start, you have to have a liver function test. And my liver function test showed it was absolutely normal. Okay. 3 months afterwards, my liver function test was in the red. And my consultant said to me, "Don't worry, it will settle down." 6 months later, 3 months later, it was even further in the red. Now, it was making the interferon drug was making me very, very sick. I was seeing a gastroenterologist, I was seeing a gynecologist, I was seeing a urologist. My internal organs weren't working properly at all. And my gastroenterologist said, whatever is your neurologist doing, he should take you off this medication. He's doing irreversible damage. And alarm bells just went off in my head. And I was thinking, no, it's my body. I don't mind you talking to him. He can say, stop it, take it, whatever, but I'm not taking it anymore. I know it's my body. And that was a wake-up call of me saying no. And I spoke to my doctor and said, I'm not taking it anymore. And she said, well, you must write a letter and tell him you're not taking it anymore, which I did. But that was so empowering, realizing that you do have a say. You don't have to go along with their recommendations. Yeah. And I say recommendations. It's not set in stone. It's not law. You're not forced to agree to anything. You can say no. And I didn't realize until that eureka moment that you can say no. So then it was a case of, as I said, it was very empowering. It was, I have the ability now to make my own choices, my own decisions on my health. So, and that was what led me to the Google searches, to finding these people who were taking LDN.
Great. That's so powerful. One of the things I always say to people with an autoimmune disease is that you really have to keep two things in mind. The first is that the medical doctors, number one, are not scientists. So you get a couple of physician scientists, but that's not the norm. What a medical doctor is primarily there to do is to get you a diagnosis and prescribe pharmaceutical drugs. And in some patients, that process is enough to get them better. Like, so I don't think I could say factually that it doesn't help a lot of people. The reality is that some people do get their diseases stabilized. I did not with the pharmaceutical drugs, but there are some lucky few out there. I've met people who've been on methotrexate for years, and their liver enzymes are perfect, so their renal function's perfect. I took it, and about 6 months in, I had serious trouble. My renal function was absolutely terrible, and my liver enzyme just kept on rising. So, but for sure, my body was not processing it. But yeah, so people have, I think, a mistaken view of what their doctors can actually do for them when they have a serious chronic illness. When you have a one-off illness, perhaps some kind of accident and emergency, that the medical system is kind of fit for purpose. But a lot of patients, I guess like yourself and myself, who aren't helped by these medicines, what the medical system tends to do is just more of the same. So the medicines haven't helped, here's some more. And at one point, you just have to really, and this is something I had to come to terms with, just say, okay, I have to take utter responsibility for my well-being. This individual has, they have prescribing power, they're a medical doctor, but ultimately, they cannot care about me as much as I can. I have to really take that responsibility. And the first part of taking that responsibility, I always say to people, is find other people who have been through what you're going through. The reality is that, thankfully, we humans are not that unique. If you're going through a serious health crisis, thousands of other people have suffered the same thing, thankfully, and some of them have beaten it. Go and ask them what they've done. That literally is it. That's the first part of the process. Find people who've done the same, who've been through the same process and are now better. They will tell you what they did, and be open-minded. Some of the things they've done are completely out of the box, and you may say, hey, this is not for me, but be open-minded enough to have that dialogue. Would you agree with that? That's like, the first kind of point of call. Be curious, go and search, go and speak to other patients.
Also, that we don't focus on in this country is diet.
Yes,
I mean,
certainly.
diet is really, really important. For example, that I know many people who have been very, very sick, who have become couch potatoes, who haven't been watching their diet, and they've eaten fast food with the high calorific value, but without any actual goodness in it.
Sure.
But if you don't fuel your body correctly, you can't expect it to run correctly.
Exactly.
And I once mentioned it to a doctor, what I was dairy-free, gluten-free, and she said, why are you doing that? And I was just stunned. A doctor asking me why I was changing my diet. But we don't focus on that. I mean, in America, all the naturopathic doctors are into finding the root causes. Now, this is what we tend to fail to do in this country. We would rather put a band-aid over the symptoms rather than looking for what is causing those symptoms. That is a really big key. And you will find that most people with an autoimmune disease has very high levels of inflammation.
Certainly.
And certain foods cause more inflammation. So, you've just got this vicious cycle going on of all this inflammation that causes so many symptoms. And there are doctors that use supplements and herbs and all this kind of thing, which reduces the inflammation, which even before they find LDN, their inflammation levels have come down and a lot of their symptoms are a lot better. And that's all done naturally. You know, it's quite amazing. But if you go back in time when they had witch doctors, etc., where we were using food as medicine, using plants and things, and I think that there might be a shift in that way of thinking in times to come, hopefully, rather than having medications that have potentially high side effects. For example, I've known many people on with fibromyalgia who've been on 14 to 20 pharmaceutical medications a day for treating different symptoms and pain, etc. And once they get on to say 4 or 5 or 6 medications, each medication carries a list, and some of them are extensive of potential side effects. Normally you don't get them, but they have to list them. But once you start to take a cocktail, the chances of you getting a side effect becomes higher. But when you get a side effect, you're told that doesn't matter. We've got this other pill that will combat these side effects. So then you take another pill to combat those. Then you carry on extending the cocktail until you need another pill to counteract the new side effects. It's unbelievable. But many of those people who then find LDN, change their diet, take some supplements, and we're all deficient in vitamin D these days, they can drop their medications to 0 to like 4 rather than taking an enormously long list of pharmaceutical medications. And of course, it's so much better for your system.
Absolutely. You're completely right. The way I always describe it is that we've been educated to see healthcare as something a doctor does to us. So we go into a doctor's office and a doctor hands you, let's say, a pill or a prescription, and you take those pills. And that is what we now consider healthcare. But you are completely right that actually part of your healthcare is how you nourish yourself. I remember when I was initially diagnosed with uveitis, I was on a lot of steroid medication, and I just simply Googled the consequences of using these steroid medications. I looked at them. I was pretty horrified. So I went back to the doctor and said, "Hey, I'm not expected to be on this for very long." And the doctor said, "Well, maybe if you keep on getting flare-ups." And I said, "Well, okay, but this is going to give me other things which can blind me. So it's possibly going to trigger a glaucoma at some point. It's definitely going to trigger, cataracts. It's definitely going to trigger, at one point with sufficient use, adrenal fatigue." And the doctor just didn't seem that concerned. So I thought, okay, well, perhaps I'm missing something here. Perhaps the risk is lower. So I looked at the National Library of Medicine, PubMed, and I saw the kind of, what are the risks of me actually getting these? And I said, look, for me, this is unacceptable. And also, it was a very kind of cavalier approach that the doctor had with me, because the doctor said, well, if you get a glaucoma, we have other medicines. And I said, well, then I'm on those medicines for life. So, I mean, so the steroid medication, hypothetically, it's, limited use, so it's temporary. But the glaucoma medication, I have to use it to the day I leave the surf. So I said, absolutely not. And it just triggered in me a kind of almost like a survival instinct to get out of that system as quickly as possible, and just to really be in the driver's seat and say, okay, what I need here is information. For sure, I can't just randomly go to Holland and Barrett's or to a health food store and just randomly buy different supplements. What I primarily need is to find out, how have other people gotten better? And to your point there about the naturopaths, I really do wish everybody with a chronic autoimmune condition goes to see a naturopath. Not suggesting that it's going to be a magic pill in every situation, but what it will do, it shifts your mentality, because you go from seeing healthcare as something somebody does, to you, to realizing you have to find the root cause. Every illness has a root cause. Try and find the root cause. You're halfway to treating it if you can find the root cause. And then the thing that your naturopath will not accept is having you as a patient when you have a poor diet. They're going to make you clean up your diet. And you're completely right. That tackles some of the inflammation. Not that it solves it completely in every patient, but it gets you some of the way. It gets you those small, easy wins. And those are so critical for just you keeping in the fight. If your symptoms are a little bit less bad, you have that renewed optimism, the hope, we can do this. And ultimately you need that.
Mm-hmm.
So I would love to find out, I mean, how does one bring up the topic of low dose naltrexone with a doctor? Is that an easy discussion to have, or is that the kind of discussion that would get us marched out of the doctor's office, pretty quickly?
It depends on your doctor.
Okay.
If your doctor has done a turn in A&E, emergency medicine, they know that they use naltrexone after an operation to get people off the opioids, to clean up their system. They know that it's the opposite of an opioid. Okay. They know that it's been trialed in doses of 300 milligrams a day back in the 70s and only found harmful in 300 milligrams a day doses to the liver. Other than that, they know it's a safe drug. So those doctors are really open to it. They don't mind prescribing it. There are actually, I think, a couple of thousand, maybe more now, of doctors that are prescribing it in the UK on the NHS. Now, people will say to me, so who are these doctors? We're not allowed to say who they are, GDPR, data protection rules and everything.
For sure.
But even if your doctor won't prescribe it for you, and if you don't live in the middle of nowhere, similar to what I do, there are other doctors you could probably move to. Okay. So I always say it's worth asking.
Okay.
Or you go down the private route. If any doctor that you could transfer to, if they are taking on new patients, if they would prescribe LDN for you. I live in a village and I know there are people 10 miles north of me who get an NHS prescription. There are people 10 miles south of me who get an NHS prescription, but I'm too far from both to become a patient, so I have to pay for mine. But I think it's a small price to pay to be able to function. But we have on our website LDN guides, and the 2022 guides are still current. There is a patient guide, there's a prescriber guide, and a dosing protocol guide. So I always suggest that people print these out, go to your doctors and say, I'd like this prescribed for me. Can I leave it with you? Could you give it to the doctor? And then make an appointment to go back and see them to discuss if they are willing to prescribe LDN. And I am always of a mind that if you're doing something, and LDN is a drug, admit it, it's a very, very low drug and it's not harmful, etc. But why hide it? If you do go down the private route, you tell your doctor that you are taking LDN. Yes. It's not a dirty secret or anything, it's absolutely fine. But I think it should be recorded that you are taking LDN, because a lot of people say, but I don't want my doctor to know. But that's their choice. But I always think honesty is the best policy, and you can't go wrong if you've told people what you're taking.
I agree. I guess the other thing I'd love to find out, now your experience has been with MS. I've seen LDN used, and I've come come into contact with people who've used it for uveitis successfully. Is that the range of illnesses, or are there other illnesses that we should keep in mind?
Yes, any illness that has an autoimmune component is possible.
Okay.
We've got a list of over 400 different conditions.
Incredible.
So I'm not
RA,
going to
Crohn's.
yeah.
Okay.
Ulcerative colitis, psoriasis, eczema, asthma.
Rosacea, I'm guessing.
Yeah, and vertigo as well. And for children, for example, autism, juvenile Crohn's, juvenile arthritis, eczema, asthma, all of these kind of things. Women's health, polycystic ovaries, endometriosis, painful periods, heavy periods, cancer, chronic pain, and there are so many
fibromyalgia for sure.
Chronic pain, regional pain syndrome, but many of the autoimmune conditions have a pain component to it as well. I mean, MS, you can get terrible pains. Crohn's pains. If you look hard and you ask any of these people with autoimmune disease, do you have any severe pain? The answer is mainly yes.
Absolutely.
Obviously, in different places of the body, but it's also used in infertility clinics to help regulate the woman's cycle. Cancer, as I said, mental health issues, absolutely amazing. Even drug-resistant bipolar, depression, can be helped with LDN. Dissociative syndrome, which is terrible, has shown to work. It takes longer. Alopecia. Now, there are certain conditions that take longer. Dermatologically, it can take much longer before you notice anything. It could be 6 months, it could be 10 months. You have to stick with it. And the answer to potential side effects, when I started, it was take 3 milligrams for a month, then go up to 4.5, end of. That was the protocol. But now we know that people with fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome, that those people are ultra sensitive to drugs, any drug.
Yes,
and they have to start much, much lower. So we're talking, it could be 0.5, could be 0.2, and work up. There is also what they call microdosing LDN, which is absolutely fascinating to me. People who are drug addicts, not through choice. I'm talking drug addicts that have had an accident in the past and they have been given opioids. Your body gets used to the opioids, but that doesn't matter because you can keep increasing the opioids until you've taken the maximum of that opioid, but then they can give you another painkiller alongside of your original one. It is so scary how easily these people have become addicted to prescription medications.
For sure.
Now, by using a microdose of LDN, and we're talking 0.001, a fraction of a grain of sugar, I mean, it is so tiny. It makes the opioids more effective, which means you can start titrating those opioids down. Because a lot of these people on these heavy-duty opioids, their pain is still a 9 or a 10 a day, which is the maximum on the scale, but they've stopped working. So it kicks them in to start working, and you have this microdose of LDN, which could be 0.001, and slowly you can titrate the opioids down while increasing the LDN, or the microdosing of LDN, up. And they don't have withdrawal effects. Great. I have spoken to hundreds of people. Honestly, it blows me away that these heavy-duty medications, they're still in pain. And after several months of working with a pain specialist, and I would say nobody must do this at home without working with a doctor, because you can go into withdrawal. It needs to have somebody knowledgeable. But they can get them off the opioids, and they Their pain, they tell me, some of them tell me it's 0, that they don't feel pain anymore, or a 3 or a 4 where they're aware of pain, but it doesn't stop them from carrying on with their day-to-day living, which I find it's like tickling something with a feather. You know, instead of hitting it with a hammer, you're tickling it with a, and it works. So, I mean,
That's wonderful.
absolutely amazing. I mean, arthritis, rheumatoid arthritis. Yes, rheumatoid arthritis is an autoimmune disease. And I had people years ago saying to me, I'd like to try it for osteoarthritis. Well, that's where your joints have worn. It's not
Yes, for
autoimmune.
sure.
You know, your bone is rubbing on bone. And you know, I don't think LDN is going to work, I used to say. But so many people tried it, and pain specialists prescribe it for all sorts of pain now. But this lady had, it was in her coccyx, so at the base of her spine, had worn, and when she sat, it was bone on bone, and she couldn't sit, she couldn't lay
Agony.
down. Yeah,
Oh,
it was awful. And you can find the interview, it's online on Vimeo and YouTube. But she took LDN and it worked for her.
that's incredible.
And I
I,
was amazed.
I've read up on a couple of cases where, it, you know, for example, an individual has, let's say, uveitis. They take LDN. The LDN helps the uveitis, but it also corrects their dry eye disease as well. Like, so they did not even intend to really look at the dry eye because they felt the uveitis being more urgent, and that, you know, the dry eye goes away, and they're seeing clearer than they have in years. And also it put the uveitis into a very, very deep long-term remission pretty rapidly. So the question that I would love to ask also is, in terms of the microdosing, is microdosing also used in the autoimmune setting or primarily in the addiction, so getting people off opioids?
Okay. There are still people that use microdosing who are very, very sensitive to drugs to
Okay,
get it into their system.
I
But
see.
the whole aim is to get them onto LDN. It's just a gradual, slow. I mean, the mantra is start low and go slow.
Yes,
And
for
you've got to
sure.
find what they call your sweet spot, the dose that suits you. So you could have 10 people in a room, and someone might find 1.5 milligrams is their ideal dose after they've been on it a while. Some might be 2, some might be 4.5, and a few go up to like 6. But it's finding that dose that suits you. And you couldn't, just by looking at people or knowing what their background, history, medication, diagnosis, you couldn't tell. Nobody can tell what is. It's a case of trying and finding out what is your dose. And then the other question we get asked is, how long is it going to be before I notice anything? Well, some people say after the first night they notice things, they slept better, they didn't have the pain or whatever. And then we did a survey, and some people, it took 15 to 18 months before they noticed anything. But in that time, when you've got a progressive disease, if you can stop the progression but it hasn't helped the symptoms, that's still a win. You're not going
That's
further downhill.
huge.
Exactly.
That is huge. So sorry, I was just going to say, especially in the case of uveitis, if there is something that can potentially stop the rapid destruction of eye tissue, that is a remarkably big win. So sorry to interrupt.
No, it's fine. So if people feel that LDN isn't working, we always say give it 18 months, you know, and decide. But 9 out of 10 who decide that actually it's not doing me any good, I'm paying for it or whatever, I'm going to stop taking it. 9 out of 10 will restart because they will say, oh, I'd actually forgotten. This now hurts. This doesn't do as well. I don't sleep as well. My concentration was better, or whatever it may be. But people forget. It's very easy. And I can remember my mum asking me every day, are you feeling any better? How are you feeling today? And I had to say to her in the end, please don't ask me, because it's depressing me, because it would be another part of me wasn't working properly. I knew every day that there was something else wrong with me. But when you start to improve, the mind is funny. You forget that that was ever a problem. It's gone.
Absolutely.
You know, it doesn't hurt, or it's not an issue. And you forget about it. And it was the same with me having all these episodes throughout my life from when I was 13. I didn't record it. It happened, it had gone. And it wasn't until you put all the pieces together of the jigsaw puzzle that you see the full picture.
Yeah, yes, you're completely right. The human body has a remarkable kind of capacity to compartmentalize our suffering, and you know, in a good way, because we probably wouldn't want to relive. So after we've now healed, you don't want to be able to so easily kind of recall the absolute agony of it. So I guess what I would also love to just kind of walk through is, do you have any advice for an individual out there who has a new diagnosis of an autoimmune disorder? You know, just how should they go about thinking about their healing? Is there like a mentality or a kind of step sequence they should think about? So for example, if you had to do it all over again today, you know, would you do certain things first? You know, would you go to the doctor first? Would you go to Google first? You know, could you maybe just kind of walk us through what the kind of stepwise approach?
Well, to get a diagnosis, you will have already been to your doctor and consultant, and many people that I've spoken to are very scared and frightened, and they don't know what the future holds. I had one young lady contact me. She'd been diagnosed with MS. She was only like 18, didn't know what MS was, didn't know what an autoimmune disease was. She had got absolutely no clue. And when the doctor said to her, the consultant rather, said that she'd got MS, she said he bent down and opened drawers and rustled some papers and looked at her, and because she'd said, what does it mean to me? Am I dying? How is it going to affect my life? She had all these questions. She was scared and frightened, which is only natural. And his reply to her was, I don't have my crystal ball with me today. Exactly. Wow. And she just came out, and she found my number, and this poor young girl, they didn't give her anything. She just went home, and I don't know how she found me. She was sobbing. She could hardly get the words out. She was going, you know, it was, her life was at an end, and she just hadn't got a clue. Was MS going to kill her? What, was she going to be completely bedridden? She didn't know anything. And I think a lot of people are genuinely scared and frightened and don't know what the future is going to hold. So hopefully when you've been diagnosed, hopefully you'll be given some information sheets, which would be handy. Not necessarily happens, I'm told, but there are also access to other services. So there are MS nurses, very hard to see one, but that is the traditional side of it. As you say, you can Google. Now you have to be careful on Google because there is a lot of misinformation out there. So you have to be very careful. Try and find some charity websites, or find reputable websites. I mean, even Facebook is rife with misinformation too. I think read as much as you can and try and find the good from the bad from the ugly, and find, as you were saying, people who have experienced similar things to yourself. I think you need to be wiser than I was back in the day, because there wasn't the internet as it is today. There wasn't the minefield of information overload, which you can get now.
Yes, certainly.
Self-help is a big is a big thing,
It,
and
it, it,
taking ownership.
it is. It is. The way I always like to think about it is that if you've worked with your medical doctor for a period of time and you're not getting better with the treatments they've given you, your next best thing is to speak to people who've survived that experience. Success leaves clues. These individuals will happily, often for free, tell you what they did. And often they will be humble enough to acknowledge that what they have done to heal themselves may not work for you, but here is how they went about it. And that is, of course, how you then found LDN, speaking to other individuals who had gone through MS and or were going through it and were getting better. And they said, hey, this is LDN. It's not going to make you worse. It's in such low doses that you really have very, very little to lose by trying it. And thankfully, you were open-minded enough to give it a go. The real kind of issue that I've seen, and part of the reason I was so motivated to set up symptoms.wiki, was that when I started getting good results dealing with my uveitis naturally, I would start to share it with, people, and they would say, well, no, my doctor did not recommend that. And I often found they just weren't open-minded enough to try. And some of these things were completely free interventions. I wasn't saying go and buy this particular vitamin. Some of it was as simple as do earthing and clean up your diet. And they would say, hey, there's no evidence that diet improves uveitis. And I would say, well, okay. The worst that will happen is that you just eat cleaner for 6 months. Like, you're not going to lose out because you've now adopted a slightly, fresh vegetables and, different rainbow colored fruits. Now you're eating this instead of eating bread. Like, this isn't going to harm you. But I noticed just such kind of psychological rigidity. And this was a significant factor in stopping people from actually getting better, that they just weren't open to things that other people had done. So again, one of the things I always say to people is you have to be open-minded. That's not to suggest you accept every bit of information without, critiquing it, but just be open-minded enough to kind of recognize that you possibly can get better doing things other than the pills your doctor has given to you. Great. Linda, how can people find out about the LDN charity? How can they support your work? Do you have a website? I'd love to share this with people.
Okay. So the charity is the LDN Research Trust, and the website is the same. So it's www.ldnresearchtrust.org. And all the information on there is free. There is nothing hidden. Everything's available to everyone, regardless where you are. LDN works in 3 ways, just to fill people in. So it was trialed back in the 1970s, late 70s, for addiction. It was used for MS first in 1985 in New York by Dr. Bernard Bahari. It has many, many trials and studies showing the efficacy and safety of naltrexone. Mm-hmm. Now, as we said before, microdosing right up to sort of like 6 milligrams. What it does, it's an opioid antagonist. It blocks certain receptors. It helps the body produce more of its own natural endorphins. It works on the toll-like receptors, which have an army, as Dr. Rachel Allen explained it, that goes and attacks the inflammation in your body. So it reduces the inflammation, and it also works on cell level and helps with cancer cells. So it has 3 different mechanisms of action, and it only stays in your body for 4 hours, and then it's gone and it carries on doing its work.
So wonderful. Excellent.
That's LDN in a nutshell for you.
Wonderful. It's really, really excellent, because I know some people personally, one very, very close friend who is on LDN, and yeah, it's providing very, very good benefit to her so far. And yeah, I just encourage everybody out there, obviously, to visit the LDN Research Trust website, and just to really find out more about LDN for autoimmune diseases, and just to see that it's backed up by a pretty large volume of rigorous evidence now, of lots and lots of patient stories and patient cases. And the doctors behind this, one cannot accuse these doctors of being underqualified. In their various disciplines, they really understand what they're doing. And yeah, I definitely encourage everybody to research more about it. Linda, it's been such an honor and a privilege to have you with us here today. Thank you so much for your time. And also, I'll just like to give a shout out to your book, if it's okay. You're updating the LDN book. Could you tell us a little bit about that, and when the next edition is going to be available?
Okay. Well, we launched the 3rd volume in November last year. So the book is available in many places, ebook as well as paperback. Each book is a unique set in the series. So if you think of it like an encyclopedia, so you've got book 1 that deals with certain conditions, book 2, and then we've got book 3. And in book 3, we have COVID, long COVID. We have virally damaged cells. That is a very interesting chapter. We have longevity, mold, drug-resistant depression, and it's a really well-informed book. And at the back we have references, so every statement that's made that would make people go, "Ooh, there is science behind it." So
wonderful.
It's not a light read. It really is based at medical professionals, doctors and pharmacists absolutely love it, and they use it as a guide. But as we were saying, going back, who are the experts with these conditions? It's the patients.
Exactly.
So patients are like sponges. They want to know all the facts, the figures, the whys, the wherefores, and this is what this book does. But if you are somebody that wants to read a story, the book's not for you, because it's a factual, deep dive book, and some people, can only read 3 or 4 chapters, and there is so much information they have to go away, absorb that, and come back and read some more. So it's not a light-hearted book. It's a heavily information-packed book. But as I say, if you have any of those conditions that the book covers, and you are a person that really wants to find out more, then it is for you.
Wonderful. It's a really, really superb resource. I was not aware that LDN has, therapeutic potential in mold-related illness, because that is one of the illnesses. I mean, I happen to know a lot of individuals in the mold-affected community, because initially, when I started my own healing journey, I had assumed that mold was a potential cause of my uveitis, because I lived in a mold-affected building, and there was just nothing out there for mold patients, at this time, and they fell through the cracks of the medical system, often because the symptoms were just so varied, and their medical doctors didn't really have an idea of how to deal with them. So their medical doctors simply stopped taking their appointments. So it was just a real medical limbo, and most of them were just simply unable to keep employment. I mean, it's a very, very terrible condition. In fact, most of them, the doctors would not even admit it was a real illness. They were just told consistently, it's all in your head, it's all in your head, before they finally got a diagnosis of a mold-related illness often through a naturopath who would do all these blood tests. Yeah, so it's fascinating. And perhaps in the future, when you have some time, I'd love to have like a deep dive into the potential of LDN for mold-related persons, because these patients are really suffering.
Well, the chapter in the book was written by Dr. Kent Holtoff, and he's one of our medical advisors, but he took the protocol that was used at the time and he found a way of improving it.
Great.
So he took it and he has rewritten the protocol for mold treatment.
Wonderful.
Because the traditional treatment prior to that was quite invasive. It made people quite sick initially, but he has found a way.
Antibiotic, they would use the pulsed antibiotics, and it would just obliterate the good bacteria and make them even sicker.
But he's found a way of doing it without making people sick, a much gentler approach of doing mold. Absolutely unbelievable. And it would be quite good if you could get him to talk about.
Will do.
Protocol.
I'll definitely reach out, because again, mold illness, so many people suffer from it, and so many people have illnesses that they're unaware are related to mold. You know, so they will get fibromyalgia, or they'll get RA, and they'll spend years kind of looking for a cause. The ultimate kind of inception of this particular disease in the person was living in a water damaged building, and so it's a mold related illness. Yeah, so I'll definitely reach out, and yeah, I'd love to have a discussion about that.
If you send me your name and address, I'll send you a copy.
Hey, thank you. That would be wonderful. Thank you very much. And what we'll do, we'll put a link to the Amazon, so people can purchase it, because I think it's one of those things that, again, if I was starting on my uveitis journey today, I would absolutely read the LDN book that you've written. I think that should be a wonderful starting point for anybody, not just with uveitis, but any autoimmune disorder. In addition, of course, to getting a proper diagnosis. When you start to feel sick, you know, get a proper diagnosis, start to read some of these books. An individual's ability to survive a chronic autoimmune condition is so intricately tied to the amount of knowledge they have. Like, so it's just one of those areas where if you really, really understand what is out there in terms of alternative therapies, mainstream therapies that can be repurposed, you stand a much better chance of not only surviving, but keeping your functional status. Because what you certainly don't want to do as somebody with an autoimmune condition, let's say, for example, uveitis, is to find the solution after blindness. You know, so you want to, as quickly as possible, nip it in the bud, just so you can get on with your life. So that's why I'm so grateful, of course, to you for the work you've done with LDN, because you've saved people years of trial and error, years of research, which I frankly had to go. I had to try every supplement under the sun, every herb under the sun. I had to go through the psychological kind of thing of thinking something's working, to then find I have another flare up, you know, 3-4 weeks later. So what you've done, and why your work is so valuable to people with autoimmune disorders, is that you've shortened that time, that they don't have to do so much of that legwork. They can pick up a book, they can read it, they can find out more, you know, on your charity's website. So on behalf of all of the patients out there, thank you, Linda. We are very grateful for your help and all of the work that you've put in.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Linda. So yeah, it's been a pleasure to have you with us. I'll stop the recording now.